Students, welcome to another Mr. Ness screencast. Today's aim is secession, and here are your objectives. Please pause the video, look these objectives over, and get ready to copy some vocab and take some notes. Let's start by reviewing the term sectionalism. Sectionalism means that people start to identify more with their region than they do with their country. They start to feel different from people outside their region to the point that they can no longer work together or get along. And this causes disunity. The issue at the root of sectional tension in the US was slavery. The South practiced slavery, the North did not. The 1850s were a really bad time for sectionalism in the US. And in the last few lessons, we looked at some events in the 1850s that caused division between the North and the South. Can you remember some of them? The decade started with the Compromise of 1850, which included passage of the Fugitive Slave Act. Then you learned about the Kansas-Nebraska Act that was in 1854, which said that the white men in each state got to vote on whether their state would allow slavery. And that led to Bleeding Kansas in 1856, when people killed each other over the question of whether a new state would allow slavery or not. Then you learned about the Dred Scott case in 1857, in which the Supreme Court denied African Americans citizenship rights. And then in 1859, John Brown tried to start a slave rebellion by attacking an armory in Harpers Ferry, Virginia. All these things made sectional tension a lot worse. The breaking point came in 1860, when Abraham Lincoln won the presidential election. Lincoln was a Republican. Can you remember what the Republican Party's founding goal was? It was opposition to any new slave states. We'll talk more about Lincoln's views on slavery later in the unit, but for now, know that before he was elected president, Lincoln had never said anything to suggest that he supported the abolition of slavery. But Southerners feared for slavery anyway, and just weeks after the election of 1860, 11 Southern states seceded from the U.S. Try saying that word, secede. Secede. It's not succeed. To succeed means to do well. You reach your goal. You are successful. Secede means that you leave a country and form a new one. You declare independence. Secede. Secession is the noun. It's the act of seceding. Secede. Try saying it. Secede. You can see that the states seceded at different times, one by one. The first state to secede was South Carolina on December 20th, 1860. Remember states' rights? We learned about them when we studied federalism, the Bill of Rights, and the 10th Amendment. States' rights are the rights that states have that the federal government can't touch. Southerners claimed that slavery was a states' rights issue. They said it was up to each state to decide whether to have slavery or not, and nobody could tell them what to do, especially Lincoln. I said that secede means to leave a country and form a new one. In 1860, the South left the United States. Do you know the name of the new country they formed? That new country was called the Confederate States of America, or CSA, and it's also called the Confederacy. The Confederacy had its own money, its own laws, its own leaders. Here's its president, Jefferson Davis. So there were now two countries, each with their own president, the United States with Lincoln and the Confederacy with Davis. So what happened when the Southern states seceded and formed the Confederacy? At first, nothing happened. Lincoln was sworn in as president on March 4th, 1861. At this point, several, but not all, of the Southern states had seceded. In his inauguration speech, Lincoln was conciliatory. He tried to calm Southerners' fears by promising that he would not interfere with their slaves and asking them to rejoin the United States. But then, the attack on Fort Sumter happened. Fort Sumter was a military fort located in South Carolina, which was in 1861 part of the Confederacy. But the fort belonged to the U.S. and was still staffed by U.S. soldiers. Confederate troops besieged the fort, and on April 12, 1861, they bombed it and took it over. Lincoln was done being conciliatory, and Congress declared war on the Confederacy. The Civil War had begun. The Civil War is the war between the United States of America, the USA, and the Confederate States of America, the CSA, also called the Confederacy. When talking about the Civil War, we often call the USA the Union, and we call the CSA the Confederacy. Don't be confused by that. The Civil War began in 1861 at Fort Sumter and lasted for 4 years until 1865. You will learn more about the Civil War in the next lesson. Alright, it's time to review the objectives. If you don't know the answer to any of them, just rewind the video and look again. And I will see you in class. Bye, students.